Time now for our Polly panel. This week we're asking how the federal government will be able to rein in the power of Facebook and Google in Australia.
And given the drought and water crisis affecting large parts of regional Australia, we're asking how we can secure the future of Australia's food bowl. To help us answer these questions, we're talking now with Labor MP Matt Keogh and Nationals MP Damian. Thank you both for joining us this morning. Damian, I might start with you, and we'll start off with this ACCC inquiry into Facebook and Google, calling for the government to take action to rein in the power of these companies. The government said it won't release its response until a bit later, until the end of the year. But what do you think should be done in response to this inquiry?
Well, it's good news that the government acted about late in 2017, where we instructed the ACCC to conduct the inquiry way back then, so we could see what was going on, we could see the problems that were emanating, and to act so far away, which meant that the ACCC has been able to do an 18-month inquiry into this, handing down their 23 recommendations just the other day, and it's given us ample time now to put this out to the community, to do the consultation process, and we expect in about 12 weeks we'll be able to consult with the community, with the industry, to make sure that we protect consumers' privacy rights, to make sure we create some more transparency. And I think that we've got the timing about right, and we saw the big fines that came out of America just yesterday, huge fines of $7 billion. So this is a real issue, and it's good to see that the Australian government is ahead of the game.
Matt, the revolution that's taking place in information technology, going from an industrial economy into essentially an information technology, people are talking about it as a whole new form of capitalism, a kind of surveillance capitalism. We're all using apps that are watching us all the time and tailoring everything to what we need and sharing our data in very complicated ways that regulators aren't necessarily up to speed with. This is something that goes so far beyond any nation's borders, certainly a medium-sized country like Australia. Is there much that we could do, or should we be working with other partners to try to re-evaluate how these companies behave?
Yeah, Josh, you're right. Like, it's a real difficulty on it when you've got these companies that operate on a global scale. How do you regulate them when they can potentially move themselves offshore and they've become such an integrated part of our everyday life that, of course, Australian consumers don't want to lose access to the positive benefits that they bring. So what is very important, and this is mentioned in the report that came from the ACCC, is making sure that you've got synergies in approach between what we do and other nations. So looking at, say, how the EU, for example, has enforced things on Google and bringing into similar requirements in Australia. So you're taking, say, the best of some of the other regulatory methods around the world and doing the same thing here, so that you're not creating those differences and a regulatory arbitrage, which is a real risk with these sorts of huge multinational entities.
What about, Matt, the potential for breaking up these companies? That's something that the ACCC didn't call for in its recommendations. But do you think, given how much power they're gathering, that could be something that we look at in the future?
Look, it's something that obviously the American sort of competition framework has had for a long time. Europe sort of has looked at going down that. That's a great example of where Australia can run into trouble. How do you tell a Google to break itself up in Australia if there's no similar requirement in Europe or the US? But I think one of the recommendations in there is looking at making sure there's notification where they're accreting even more monopoly type power and misusing that power, and making sure we've got strong regulations there. And that's one of the concerns that I do have, is not only has this review taken 18 months, we were asking the government to do this 3 years ago, and they've said in principle they like it, but it's probably another 12 months again before we actually see any action on this.
Damian, Matt just mentioned getting people's consent for the use of their data and for privacy. This is something that the Europeans have been struggling with as well. When you go to a British website, I'm sure we're all familiar with the fact that you constantly have to click on a little OK button every single website that you go to, because it says we're putting cookies on your system and so on. And eventually it just becomes a background din. It doesn't actually do anything. You just go yes, 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 yes. Are there more sophisticated ways that we can think about empowering people to have control over their data than simply clicking yes every time they visit a website or open an app?
Well, I think the consultation process will find out those new ways of doing just that. But I think, yes, you're right. We're all sick of having our privacy not totally inflicted, but certainly disturbed by the way the world seems to know what you're doing. The world seems to know what restaurant you're in. The world seems to know what department store you're in, where you've been, and I think so much of the information needs to be protected for our consumers. And I think that's what we'll end up doing. We need to create transparency. We need to make sure there's no anti-competition in relation to this, what's happening. And I just think that there's a great opportunity for us to act now in accordance with what mainstream Australia would expect us to do that.
Well, Damian, it does feel a little bit like the horse has bolted. Is Matt right in saying that the government's been a bit slow to act here?
Well, the opposition will always say that we should have done it with a different colour, or we should have done it sooner, or we should have done it later, or we should have done it some other way. The fact is we acted 18 months ago. We could see the trends happening. We gave the ACCC 18 months to do a thorough investigation. They've handed down 23 recommendations, and we are going to take this now to the industries. We need to make sure that our news and our media outlets are protected. We need to make sure that our consumers are protected. We will do what we have to do. We've got a great base to work from now. That we've got the ACCC's recommendations and their report in front of us, and we've given ourselves the time to do it properly. The call has come for regulation and possibly legislation. So we will do that. But again, this is a never-changing landscape, and we have been ahead of the game, and we will continue to stay ahead of the game to protect Australia's people.
Matt, one of the ACCC's recommendations has to do with fake news and exactly how social media platforms should present us with news that might be misinformation or might be fake. That is obviously going to raise free speech concerns, because why can't I put my spin on what's going on in the world, and who is Facebook to tell me that what I'm saying is a distortion of the truth if I firmly believe it? Are you confident that regulators and governments can navigate that water?
Yeah, I saw those recommendations, and look, it's a fraught area, because you're effectively saying, hey, we want government to get into regulating what can be broadcast or how is that prioritised. But I think also it's really important to recognise the way in which entities like Facebook and Google put their own manipulation over the top of that, and partly it's about just understanding how that works so that there's transparency. And a big part of this is also upskilling our population, making sure that we have better digital literacy so people are able to better understand what they're seeing at the top of their feed. May not be the most accurate information. It might be the way in which someone's been able to manipulate those algorithms to get to the top of the feed. And we do need to increase our digital literacy across the country on that, as well as getting these companies to acknowledge that and be transparent about how they operate those systems so people can properly understand what they're being presented with.
All right, well, this week new research came out showing that the speed and extent of global warming exceeds any similar event in the last 2,000 years. Damian, on this issue, you spend a lot of time in regional areas with people who are particularly feeling this drought. Is the government treating this as the emergency that it is?
I think they are in relation to on-the-ground support and the emergency services that we're delivering to our people. But the bigger issue has to do with our water policy. So right throughout the Goulburn Valley, right throughout southern New South Wales, we've got a situation now where farmers have been forced off the land, forced off their farms, that they've farmed successfully for 20 and 30 years. They've been forced off their land because they don't have enough water, and yet the water's running down the rivers at near spilling capacity. So it's this ridiculous situation where we've given so much water back to the environment that we need to fix that balance up to enable our farmers to continue to farm.
Obviously, this has all got to do with climate change as well, Damian. I mean, we've got Pacific countries calling on Australia specifically to do more about climate change policies. So how do you measure up those two things?
Well, water allocation has got nothing to do with climate change. So quite simply,
surely the amount of water we have
what we need to do is look at. Yes, so in years of diminished rainfall and diminished runoff into our river systems and into our reservoirs, that's when the price of water spikes uncontrollably. Right at the moment, it's $600 per megalitre. Most farmers are out of the game when the price of water goes past $200. So we've got a situation here where there's so much water running down the rivers for both trade flows and also for environmental flows that there's actually damage being done to our river system. And every environmental scientist will agree that there is damage being done to our rivers in the middle of a drought because there's so much water running down the rivers, and yet our farmers can't touch it. I mean, we really have to look at the purpose of these flows. We've got environmental flows running down the middle of the Goulburn, right now in the middle of winter to aid fish breeding facilities. So we've just got to try and find the right balance here to see how much do we want to sacrifice in relation to our farmers' welfare in order to breed healthier fish.
Matt, climate change doesn't just cause drought, it causes more erratic weather systems all over the place. So in some cases that might mean more rainfall, in some cases it might mean heavier cyclones, in some cases it might mean drought. How do you navigate that when we've got a very large country that's very heavily dependent on our agricultural sector and an increasingly unpredictable weather system?
Well, there is a role for government to get involved more into mitigation systems and funding those, because at the moment we see, whether it's through drought and drought relief, which we'd like to see the government do more of. They made a lot of noise this week about supporting farmers, but the funding that they've committed to won't be delivered for another 12 months at least. But then we also see governments paying out when they're having to repair the damage from cyclones. What we need to see is government also invest in mitigation strategies. How do we make sure that our farmers are best prepared for the low rain season? How do we make sure that the people in North Queensland or the north of Western Australia are prepared for floods and cyclone damage, so that cost is mitigated against, because we're understanding that the risks that are coming from those cyclones or from those droughts are going to be more severe and more frequent. We can't just be continually trying to repair something. We need to make sure we're investing in making those people's lives better going forward in a more sustainable way.
How would Labor do that long term?
Well, we're obviously just post the election, we're looking at everything's on the table, but it is something that I was discussing with colleagues just this week, that we need to be conscious of having broader solutions available to people, and looking at how do we acknowledge people live in these difficult climates, and those climates are getting harder to live in. If we're seeing more frequent storms or we're seeing more regular drought, how do we help them? This is why we've had irrigation efficiency schemes along the Murray to try and help farmers be able to produce a high yield using less water. One of the effects, though, of how that has occurred, as we've seen in reports over the last few weeks, is we're seeing now less runoff from those farms because of more efficient irrigation techniques, and we need to make sure those things are factored into our planning as well.
Matt, on the question specifically of climate change and not just water and drought, your party, the Labor Party, got smashed in Queensland at the last election, in part due to some level of ambiguity and concern in that state about what exactly your climate policy was and whether it would have a bad effect on the mining industry. Are you optimistic that you guys can sort out a very clear path that's going to appease both sides, so that you're not sort of standing on two different barges as they split apart in the water and you end up falling in the lake?
Well, I'm quite optimistic, and as the Shadow Minister for WA Resources, I'm very clear that we are the Labor Party. We are the party for jobs, and we are a party that is about making sure that we've got sustainable job availability, and that includes making sure that we support our resources sector, which is a key driver of jobs across the country, across many different commodities.
So you're not the party for climate if the climate interferes with jobs?
We can make sure that we are able to deliver on climate change policy, and we can deliver on jobs, and that includes jobs from the resources industry.
You can't. There will
absolutely you can, Josh, and I think that's one of the dichotomies that the government's tried to push against us at the last election, which was incorrect. We got muddled in our language. I accept that. And that's why I'm being very clear with you today. We are absolutely a party that supports the resources industry. We also acknowledge, unlike the government, that things need to be done more constructively around climate change. The country is crying out for a policy, any policy from government, and they've been there for 6 years and we've still got nothing from them.
Damian, your response to that?
Well, we've got more solar panels going in Australia per capita than anywhere else in the world, nearly double that of our nearest competitor. So when you're on a per capita basis, the amount of solar panels that are going in around Australia, people say we're not acting on climate change, we're not acting on renewables. It's just an absolute furphy. I mean, we are leading the world. We are going to smash our Paris commitments. We are so far ahead of our Paris commitments. I mean, I don't know what people want us to do. We are already on track to deliver our commitments on a global station. However, we just got to make sure we bring our people with us and don't go running off and smashing our communities and smashing the economy in the process. We can do it all. We've got the track record to suggest that we can keep the economy going strong, but we can also, as I say, lead the world when it comes to solar panels on a per capita basis.
All right, Damian Drum, Matt Keogh, thanks for your time this morning.
It's great to be with you guys.